I moved here to study, and I'm embarrassed that this happened. After graduating from college, I was preparing for the secondary school teacher certification exam when I got involved with an older widow. I was born in New Jersey. This was my first time leaving New Jersey in my life, despite studying hard for the teacher certification exam at a tutoring center. I failed repeatedly. I had been studying diligently for 2 years, but still failed with good grades. I've wanted to be a teacher since I was young. I used to play teacher with my younger siblings, and I went to college without any trouble. However, the teacher certification exam was a high barrier. I decided to try one last time and moved to a quiet countryside village to forget city life and focus on my studies. The village was very small with just over a dozen houses, but the community was welcoming. It was a place once featured as a remote area in our country, and the village was beautiful. I felt at peace living there, surrounded by low mountains, wide fields, and narrow roads. I rented an empty house through a friend of a friend. The house came with basic furnishings, and having helped my father with household chores since I was young, I could manage cooking for myself. The house had a small yard, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. I unpacked my things in the smaller room and used the larger room for studying. While I was adapting to living, studying, eating, and sleeping in this house, the person who introduced me to the house came by and mentioned that someone they knew was in a tough situation and needed to stay here, asking if it would be all right for them to use the large room, since I planned to use the house alone until just before the teacher certification exam, and it wouldn't interfere with my studies. I didn't mind someone else living there. Out of guilt, they offered to halve my rent. And since I had no financial leeway and had been relying on my parents for allowance, this offer was particularly tempting. I wouldn't have to pay for rent or food while studying at the academy, and I insisted on studying in a quiet place. This one last time, receiving support from my parents who weren't in a great financial situation themselves. The rent wasn't too expensive, but I planned to save up half of it for something I wanted later. But I never imagined she would bring so many children with her. I cleared out the large room and arranged the smaller room for studying. A few days later, some children came into the yard, followed by a small, pretty-looking woman. "I'm sorry, I have 5 kids," she said with a laugh. But it struck me as a moment of realization. She had her hands full. She mentioned that her youngest had just turned 2 when her husband passed away unexpectedly. She had no in-laws or parents of her own, having grown up in an orphanage, a place exclusively for girls at the time. She left with some independence money, worked, and eventually met her husband, who also grew up in an orphanage. Despite never knowing their parents, they wanted to be good parents themselves, which led to their large family. After her husband's sudden death, she discovered he had taken out loans in preparation to start a franchise business. Around the time they were expecting their youngest, they lived cozily in a small house, but had to leave due to the loans, ending up in a remote village. The children's eyes all sparkled with innocence. The mother was busy with the paperwork for moving and transferring schools, willing to do any job available in the village. She has 3 daughters and 2 sons, the older boys often finding joy in sleeping in my room. She apologized, yet seemed to find a moment to breathe. At night, I could hear her telling old stories to her daughters in the next room. It's astonishing how she's managed to never raise her voice at her children. in such dire circumstances, truly a remarkable mother. The boys excitedly talked about their dad, saying, "Our dad was the best, even better than others. He didn't go to college, but was smart up until high school. He would teach us kindly whenever we asked and helped with chores." The eldest son added, "If Dad were here, we could have started the store, paid off the loans, and gradually improved our situation. But now it's really tough," his mood quickly darkening. Despite the noise of 5 kids, which could sometimes be overwhelming, their family seemed powered by love, capable of overcoming any challenge. Then, one night, I heard her sighing in the next room. "Honey, why did you have to go first? How am I supposed to live? I'm barely getting by in this remote village we've never been to before." Her monologue, filled with sorrow, touched my heart. Living in a single room with 5 children must be incredibly challenging. Strangely, I found myself increasingly concerned about her. In the morning, she would send the fourth and youngest to daycare, working wherever she could find piecemeal work or at a nearby small factory to earn their daily wages. Raising a brood of kids, she had honed her cooking skills to perfection. She could whip up an array of dishes in no time. I used to skip breakfast, only eating lunch and dinner. But once she started preparing meals, I joined her at the table. We had plenty of side dishes sent from home and brought over by our kind neighbors, so cooking rice was all that was needed. However, she insisted on making fresh dishes for the kids. Having been used to cold leftovers, the warmth of her freshly prepared meals felt like a comforting layer of oil coating my stomach. Gradually, I began to comfortably accept her cooking and resolved to help her without complaint if the opportunity ever arose. One breezy autumn night, waking up to use the bathroom, I heard noises from the kitchen. There she was, drinking water from the fridge. "You're up. It's 2 a.m. You should be sleeping," she said. "I can't sleep. My life feels so pitiful and I miss my late husband. But if I want to adapt and survive here, I have to take any job that comes my way," she sighed. Living together for a few months, she found comfort in my company. She always wanted to show a strong front to the kids and never complained. But that night she opened up about her struggles. Before moving here, she had faced numerous temptations from her husband's friends and colleagues, but with no parents or siblings and 5 kids to care for, she couldn't accept any offers, no matter how favorable. She then asked, "You seem like you'd make a great teacher. You're a genuinely good person. Do you have a girlfriend in New Jersey?" "I've put off dating until I pass my exams," I replied. I saw a mix of relief and something else in her expression. Becoming a widow in my mid-30s and still thinking about men. "I guess I'm not over it," she said, looking at me. And that night, in the living room, we became one. The fear of waking the kids was palpable. After accepting me, she even shed tears. And as time went on, we found more moments together when the kids were at school. One day, I rushed to work after a hasty morning and ended up nodding off at my desk. "What about me? But somehow I study better," I joked, looking at her. We spent a long time together in the living room after the kids fell into a deep sleep. Through this awkward cohabitation, I finally passed the teacher certification exam on my 3rd try. It was a bittersweet farewell when I returned to New Jersey, but we've kept in touch ever since. She seemed to have settled into life there, making the most of the benefits available to children from agricultural and fishing communities. I met my current wife at the school where I started working. She's a year younger than me, a beloved moral education teacher, known for her warm approach to the kids and immensely popular among them. I might be bragging, but I was even voted the most handsome teacher by the students. After 4 years of teaching, her kids have grown up. Two, her eldest is now in their senior year of high school. She married a wealthy bachelor from the area, known for his prosperous farming. He's a professional farmer, specializing in cultivating exotic crops for export. She sends me these special crops as a way of repaying the kindness I showed her and her family during their toughest times. I tell her to not worry about me and to live comfortably, but she says she can't forget how I generously offered them a large room and accepted them when they were in dire need. She wishes I'd think of her as an older sister. I laughed and said, "All right, sis. If your husband ever gives you trouble, just tell me. I'll be your brother and sort it out." I never imagined such events unfolding while studying in such a remote area, but I'm thankful everything turned out well in the end.
When I turned 18, my life took a difficult turn. My parents, Rachel and Gregory, and my twin sister, Olivia, decided there wasn't enough space for me at home, essentially forcing me to leave. For the next few years, I struggled with an unstable life, moving from one temporary living situation to another, even living in a tent at one point. I did whatever I could to get by. Despite these challenges, I eventually built a stable life and was able to buy my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've gotten my life in order, my family has suddenly appeared. Led by Olivia, who is now expecting her 4th child, they showed up at my door unannounced, looking to move in. This is the same sister who once pushed for me to be kicked out, saying there wasn't enough room for both of us in our childhood home. Growing up, I always felt like I was treated as less important than Olivia. It was clear Rachel and Gregory preferred her, and they even admitted they wouldn't have had me if Olivia hadn't been conceived. She was always the center of attention, getting all the best toys and clothes, while I barely received enough to keep up appearances. Olivia has always shown selfish, narcissistic traits, likely because of how her parents favor her. Instead of being a supportive sibling, she consistently brought me down. The only person who ever treated me kindly in our family was my grandfather, Edward. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, the last bit of kindness in my home disappeared. When Olivia got pregnant as a teenager, Rachel and Gregory married her off to her boyfriend, Liam, and brought him to live in our already crowded house. This left me without even a couch to sleep on. My dad, Gregory, sometimes slept on the living room couch, so that wasn't an option either. With nowhere else to go and being told not to ask relatives for help so the family's dysfunction would stay hidden, I was completely forced out. I ended up living in a tent in our backyard, which happened after the police mistakenly brought me home during a brief period of homelessness. This setup was meant to be a reward for keeping quiet about the reality of my living situation. After years of struggle and hard work, I finally managed to improve my life both physically and emotionally. Now, as my family tries to intrude on the life I've carefully built, I'm at a crossroads, unsure how to deal with their unexpected and unwelcome return. They had once offered me a spot to live in their backyard, but only if I cleaned it up first. Despite the mess, which was littered with flour, sugar, and overrun by rodents, I accepted. At one of the lowest points in my life, I saw this as an opportunity and quickly moved in. Olivia, on the other hand, was relieved to see me go, pointing out that there wasn't enough room for me at her place. No one even asked where I was planning to go. Transforming the backyard into a livable space was tough, especially dealing with the rodent problem, but I eventually made it work. Unfortunately, the situation forced me to drop out of high school just a few months before my final exams. My friends encouraged me to stay in the backyard and finish school, but by that time, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying solely on my earnings to get by. Before long, I realized I needed to improve my skills for a better future. Gregory was a service technician, and as a kid, I often played with his tools instead of toys, helping him with household repairs. That early experience came in handy later as I decided to invest in my education and eventually got a job at a car manufacturing plant. I worked hard and steadily climbed the career ladder until I became a design manager. Recently, an old friend, Ethan, who was going through a divorce, needed to sell his house quickly. Even though I was hesitant at first, the huge discount and flexible payment plan he offered were too good to pass up, so I decided to buy it. I bought a 4-bedroom house and moved in about 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. I hadn't had any contact with them for years, and I lived 17 miles away, so their visit was completely unexpected. I suspect a neighbor who still follows me on social media might have told them where I live. When they barged in, Rachel and Gregory expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it felt strange to see them react to me owning a house at 26, especially since they were still renting. Olivia and Liam wandered around the house as if they were inspecting it to move in. When I confronted them, they vaguely claimed they were just checking on me. It was ironic that they suddenly showed interest in my life, now when I didn't need them anymore. During their visit, Olivia boldly claimed a bedroom for herself, excited about the private bathroom, as though it was already decided that they would move in. Gregory and Rachel tried to calm her down, asking her to manage her children better. In the middle of this chaos, I was shocked and immediately shut down any discussion about them moving in. The situation quickly escalated as they started pushing the idea that I had a moral obligation to house Olivia because of family duty. I stood my ground, reminding them that it was their responsibility, not mine, to provide for their children. I firmly told them to leave my home, making it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I was living on my own terms, free from the pressure of their unwanted expectations. I recalled how, back when I was younger, my grandfather Edward allowed my cousin to sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented about how I had struggled, living with rodents in my employer's garage, and then in a cramped apartment for 10 years, but no one from my family ever checked on me. When I shared these memories, Rachel began to cry and try to hug me, but I stopped her and insisted they leave. Liam, my brother-in-law, told me to toughen up, bringing up his own hard times and saying I had more than enough space in my house since I was single. I sharply told him to stay quiet. Olivia cursed at me for raising my voice at her husband, but I stood firm and told them they needed to leave or things would escalate. I made them leave before they could argue back. My anger was clear. I had endured their toxic and selfish behavior for too long, and now their greed was obvious. I was no longer the obedient teenager they used to manipulate. If they had pushed any further, I was fully prepared to involve the police. To clarify, Olivia never once offered to pay rent. She and Liam had been freeloading off Rachel and Gregory for over a decade, and now they seemed determined to do the same with me. Despite the clear strain this put on Rachel and Gregory, they never took any steps to encourage Olivia to become independent. Instead, they tried to dump the responsibility onto me. A week after our first confrontation, Rachel returned, but this time she was more direct. She argued that my home had enough room to house Olivia and her family, again mentioning how crowded things were at their place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When persuasion didn't work, she shifted to veiled threats, implying that my large, mostly empty house was a security risk and that having family around would be safer and helpful with household chores. I dismissed her manipulative tactics and told her clearly to leave and not come back. Just a few days later, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity around my house. He said he had seen a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around the backyard, likely trying to break in. I was grateful for his vigilance, gave him my contact information, and asked him to keep an eye on things. I had planned to install security cameras, but unfortunately, I didn't act fast enough. 5 days later, The same neighbor called to say he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found out he was right. Olivia and Liam had entered through a rear window. When I confronted them, Olivia tried to justify their actions, claiming they had no other choice and accusing me of being unreasonable. As I processed her audacity, Liam smugly commented on how easy it had been. I lost my temper and physically confronted him. Olivia tried to get between us, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. The situation spiraled out of control, and Olivia called Rachel and Gregory, telling them I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they began sorting things out while Olivia and Liam frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges against all of them. However, Olivia denied the break-in and assault, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong and that her son's actions were only a prank. When Rachel and Gregory arrived, they immediately took Olivia's side, pressuring me to drop the charges. They banded together to defend her and tried to make me out to be the vindictive one. Faced with their collective denial and manipulation, I realized they were determined to gaslight me into submission. I was determined not to let my family rewrite the narrative of what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped forward with a crucial statement, which ultimately led to the arrest of everyone involved in the assault. They spent the night in jail because Rachel and Gregory couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they faced trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries and making sure there were no internal damages. I took a few days off to recover and press charges for assault, also seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court granted. Despite Rachel and Gregory's attempts to persuade me to drop the charges, I stood firm. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in orchestrating the attack. Since my nephew is a minor, he was dealt with under juvenile law and only spent a short time in a juvenile facility, with his parents held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and covering my medical expenses. Olivia and Liam were fined heavily. In an attempt to ease their financial burden, they asked the court to allow them to complete part of their fine through community service. Since the incident, things have been relatively quiet. I hope Olivia and Liam have learned their lesson and will keep their distance. However, Rachel and Gregory haven't let this go. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I reluctantly let them in. They pleaded for my help, but when it became clear they were speaking on behalf of Olivia, I immediately refused to get involved. That's when they revealed their real reason for visiting. They were getting older, their home was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their lack of responsibility as parents. They mentioned the idea of giving their house to Olivia, which I saw as another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that Olivia could pay rent to live in my house, and that I could use it to cover my mortgage. I firmly declined, stating that Olivia needed to handle her own financial problems without my involvement. They continued to plead, arguing that my house was too big for just one person. But I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or accommodating them out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and emphasized that I would not be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties to their advantage, but I remained firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them. Regardless of whatever names they might call me, I resolved not to give in to their demands or let them take advantage of me. This experience has been a harsh reminder of how toxic and manipulative my family can be. Despite their actions, I refuse to let them drag me back into the chaos I've worked so hard to escape. I've built a life of independence and stability, and I intend to keep it that way. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter in my life, stronger and wiser from this experience. I've decided to install security cameras to ensure my home remains my sanctuary and to prevent any further intrusions. No matter how hard they try, I am determined to protect the life I've created for myself. It's not just about keeping them out, it's about finally putting myself first.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a sunny morning in the bustling city of Charleston. A light breeze brushed through the open windows of a suburban home, where Lily Thompson, a beautiful 32-year-old marketing executive, and her husband Ben, a quiet 34-year-old architect, sat having breakfast. Lily was the type of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Tall, with jet-black hair and a smile that could light up any room, she had always been the center of attention, especially at work. Ben, on the other hand, was a man of few words. He was meticulous, dependable, and grounded. He had always been content with a simple life, one he thought would last forever. Lily had met Ben in college, and they quickly fell in love. They married after graduation, and with a few years of hard work, they built a life together, one of comfort and stability. To everyone around them, they were the couple everyone envied. They had a beautiful home, a steady income, and a picture-perfect marriage. But as they sat across from each other that morning, sipping coffee, a heavy silence lingered. Lily stared at her phone, texting under the table. Ben, absorbed in the morning newspaper, didn't notice. But the slight furrow in his brow said everything. Something had changed. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt the distance growing between them. Unbeknownst to Ben, Lily had been leading a double life for nearly a year. She had fallen into an affair with a colleague from her marketing firm, Ryan Mitchell, a man with a magnetic personality and a rebellious spirit that Lily found irresistible. Ryan wasn't like Ben. He was unpredictable, exciting, and full of charm. Where Ben was methodical and reliable, Ryan was impulsive and spontaneous, offering Lily a world that Ben could never give her. Their affair started as a brief fling at a company conference, but it quickly grew into something more. Ryan would meet her in secret, slipping into hidden hotels or taking weekend trips to distant cities. Every time she returned home to Ben, she was filled with guilt, but she couldn't stop herself from going back for more. One Friday evening, as Ben was working late on a new design project, Lily snuck out for another meeting with Ryan. This time, however, it was different. As she climbed into her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The nagging voice in her head told her that she was living on borrowed time. But she silenced it, telling herself she deserved to live in the moment. Ryan greeted her with a kiss, and they spent the evening together, oblivious to the storm brewing on the other side of town. Days turned into weeks, and Ben's suspicions started to grow. At first, they were subtle. A missed dinner here, an unexplained delay there. Lily had always been a little absent-minded about time, but recently it seemed like she was purposely avoiding him. Her late nights at work became more frequent, and she started leaving her phone unattended, something she had never done before. One night, while Lily was getting ready for another work event, Ben decided to do something he had never done before. He checked her phone. What he found made his heart drop. Lily's text messages were full of romantic words, intimate photos, and plans that were clearly not for a work event. The messages were from Ryan, and they left no room for doubt. The betrayal stung deeply, but Ben wasn't a man of hasty decisions. He knew he needed more than just messages to confront her. He needed to understand what was happening. The next day, Ben decided to confront Lily. It was a Saturday morning, and they were having breakfast together. The weight of the situation hung heavily between them, but neither of them spoke a word about it. Finally, Ben broke the silence. "Lily, we need to talk," Ben said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable tension. Lily looked up, a smile playing on her lips. "What's wrong, babe?" "I know about you and Ryan," Ben said, his voice steady but filled with hurt. Lily froze. Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked like she had seen a ghost. She dropped her fork, unable to speak. "I found your messages," Ben continued, pulling out his phone and showing her the texts. "I know everything, Lily." Lily's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't say anything. She could barely look at him. The man she had loved, the man who trusted her, was sitting across from her with broken eyes, staring at the very evidence of her betrayal. "I'm sorry, Ben," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened." Ben looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Did you ever think about me, Lily? About the life we built? About everything we've shared?" His voice wavered slightly, the hurt bleeding through. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she repeated. "But I felt trapped. Ryan, he makes me feel alive in ways you don't anymore." Ben didn't speak for a long time. His emotions were raw, but there was no rage in him, only sadness. Finally, he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm done," he said, his voice firm. "We're finished." After the confrontation, Ben was no longer the man who had once been blinded by love. He had glimpsed the betrayal in its cruelest form, and now there was a coldness in his heart, a new determination. His pain, though deep, had transformed into something else entirely. The man who had once silently trusted his wife was gone. In his place stood someone far more resolute. Ben was methodical, patient, and calculated. He had always been a man who planned his actions. When it came to revenge, he knew that swift and impulsive decisions rarely brought satisfaction. It was the long game that mattered. He wasted no time. Ben began to meet with a divorce attorney, carefully gathering evidence and planning his next steps. He requested all financial records and made sure to thoroughly review their assets. He knew Lily's career, her connections, and her lavish spending habits. He understood that without his income, she would have nothing. What would she be left with, he wondered, when everything was stripped away? In the quiet of his office, Ben sat behind his desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the wood. He wasn't angry, he wasn't even sad anymore. He was simply calculating how best to dismantle the life they had built together. Lily's betrayal, in his mind, was the end of everything between them. The years they spent together meant nothing now, not when everything he had trusted had been shattered. The more Ben thought about it, the more he realized that his revenge wasn't about inflicting pain. It was about making her understand the depth of her mistake. He would take away what mattered to her most, her security, her freedom, and her image. He would make her feel the weight of her actions, but without a single outburst, without any violence, just cold, impassive reality. Ben had learned early on that people underestimated quiet strength. In the weeks following his discovery, he began pulling the strings, gathering evidence, securing documents, and meeting with professionals. It was a slow build, but it was methodical, and it would be perfect. The days that followed their argument were strange for both of them. To the outside world, everything appeared normal. Ben was still going to work, still meeting with colleagues and clients, his demeanor unchanged. Lily, too, kept up appearances, pretending that their marriage was still intact. They spoke little to each other at home, and when they did, it was strained, forced. But there was a palpable tension between them, like an invisible line of communication that they both knew existed, but chose not to acknowledge. Lily, in particular, grew more and more anxious. She could feel Ben pulling away emotionally, even if he never said a word. He wasn't the man she once knew, the trusting, loving partner. There was a distance in his eyes, a calm that made her heart race with a mix of fear and guilt. She thought she could keep up the charade for a little longer, but deep down, she knew that the walls were closing in. Ben was playing his own game now, and she wasn't sure if she could keep up. One evening, Lily tried to bridge the gap. She had spent hours picking out the perfect dress, attempting to recreate the warmth of the evenings they used to share. She prepared a candlelit dinner in hopes of rekindling some kind of connection. When Ben walked in, she greeted him with a smile, her heart in her throat. She needed him to understand that she regretted what had happened. "Ben, we need to talk," she began softly as they sat down at the table. She tried to mask the desperation in her voice. I've been thinking about everything, and I want to fix this. Can we try to make it work? Please. I love you. Ben didn't answer immediately. He picked up his glass of wine, staring into it as if lost in thought. Lily could feel her palms sweating. She had never been this vulnerable with him before, not like this. I don't know if we can, Ben said quietly, his voice steady but distant. You broke my trust, Lily. I don't know if that can ever be fixed. The words stung, but Lily pushed forward. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. Please don't let one mistake destroy everything we've built. Ben put his glass down gently, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in days. There was no anger, no yelling. His eyes were calm, almost detached. You don't understand, Lily. This isn't just about a mistake. This is about everything. The lies, the deceit. You've ruined it all. He paused, his voice lowering. And now, you have to live with that. Lily felt the room grow colder, the silence thickening between them. She knew Ben had already made up his mind.
Ben had already made up his mind. There was no more room for negotiation, no more second chances. He wasn't angry anymore. He was done. The divorce proceedings were swift. Ben had already prepared everything. His lawyer, a shrewd and efficient woman named Caroline, made it clear from the start that there would be no room for negotiation. The assets they had built together were now divided with the cold efficiency of a well-executed plan. The house, the cars, the savings, they were all transferred into Ben's name. Lily was left with a fraction of their joint wealth, a small amount of money, and the house they had once shared, but only temporarily. Ben had made sure that within months it would be sold. Lily was left stunned. She had no idea the extent of Ben's planning. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a complete dismantling of her life. Her career, which she had always been so proud of, began to fall apart. The affair had become public knowledge, and Lily found herself ostracized by friends and colleagues. She lost her job due to the scandal. The company, unwilling to deal with the bad press, quickly terminated her contract, leaving her with little to show for her years of hard work. Ben's revenge had been methodical, but it wasn't cruel. He had given her exactly what she had given him, a life of nothing. No love, no security, no future. One night, Lily sat alone in the empty house, staring at the walls. Everything she had worked for, everything she had once taken for granted, was gone. The world outside seemed distant, unrecognizable. She had tried to fight for Ben, tried to prove that she could change, but it was too late. There was nothing left but regret and the harsh reality of her choices. She replayed their last conversation over and over in her mind, wondering where everything went wrong. How could she have thrown it all away? How could she have betrayed the man who had loved her unconditionally? Her mind was clouded with guilt, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage she had caused. Ben was gone, and she couldn't undo the destruction of their marriage. In those quiet moments of reflection, Lily realized something that cut deeper than any loss. She had lost herself in her pursuit of something she thought she wanted. In seeking excitement with Ryan, she had destroyed everything she had built with Ben. The trust, the love, the companionship. Months passed. Ben continued to move on with his life. His business flourished, and he found peace in the quiet moments he had longed for. He traveled to places he had always dreamed of visiting, rebuilt relationships with old friends, and began dating again, though he kept things simple. He wasn't looking for another marriage. What mattered now was his own healing. As for Lily, she spent her days in silence. She moved to a small apartment in a less desirable part of town, trying to rebuild a life she had lost. But the truth was, it would never be the same. She had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, and some mistakes are impossible to undo. One rainy afternoon, Lily found herself standing in front of Ben's office, staring at the building that had once been a symbol of their shared future. She had come to a realization. There was no point in holding on to the past. She needed to let go, just as Ben had done. He had taken back his life. his dignity, and had moved forward. She sent him a simple message. "I wish I could turn back time, Ben. I'm sorry for everything." Ben read the message but didn't reply. He had already said everything that needed to be said. The chapter was over. Narrator. Lily's story is a reminder of the destructive power of betrayal and the painful cost of living in secrets. Ben's revenge was not violent or dramatic. It was the slow burn of a man who had lost everything, but who took control of his life and his future. In the end, Lily's regret was all she had left. Ben, on the other hand, found peace in the quiet aftermath of his actions. Narrator, what do you think of Ben's quiet yet calculated revenge? Was it too much, or was it exactly what Lily deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that dive into the complexities of life, love, and betrayal. Thanks for watching. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is living well.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I was sitting in a bar having a quiet time drinking my usual scotch and water when I watched her walk up to the jukebox and put a quarter in. To me, she was still the most beautiful girl in the world and had been since I had first met her. I knew she knew I was there. She had come to give me a reminder once again of where we were in our relationship. I knew we were in limbo because I could not decide how to resolve it all. It took about 30 seconds for the record to start to play. Love hurts, love scars, love wounds and marks blasted through the speakers. The words of that song took me back to the day I had realized it all had begun. It had reached the point that I had put together a great scheme by one to take me down and destroy my marriage. She had almost succeeded. All it had taken was determination, focus, and attention to the details along with the time for the power of persuasion to work. It didn't hurt that she had the power and influence. The problem for me was I did not know how I could get that person's ongoing conduct to end. Once she failed, I knew she would try again. The angle of how it had been done had been so masterfully applied that no one would believe the person behind it had almost achieved it. I even knew the reason my problem now was coming to a head. The question I had to decide was how I was going to deal with it. The problem started years ago on the day that Jody and I got married. Jody's first two names are Joe and Mandy. Her parents started calling her Jody long before she started grade school. I met her at a mutual friend's birthday party a year after I started teaching high school. I wasn't looking for love or a relationship and had stepped in to break up an argument between her and her date. I got them parted and had escorted him off the property by suggesting he go home and come down from whatever he was high on. As I watched him drive off, I called the local police station and warned them that he was driving under the influence of something. I have even given them the make, model, and plate numbers. When they pulled him over with his anger still raging, he had decided to swing at the police officers. That was his first mistake. That allowed them to search the vehicle and they found enough drugs to charge him with possession with the intention to sell. What I didn't know, he used Jody's brother's name to try to defuse his situation. Since Jody had come with him, I offered to give her a ride home when the events started to wind down. She asked about my date, and I said I had come alone. That perked her interest and I explained that I was too busy paying down educational debts and couldn't afford one. She laughed and said get serious, then accepted the ride home. Her older brother, a police detective, had heard about the bust and was waiting at his parents' place for Jody to get home because he was concerned about her well-being. I didn't know when I first met him that he was one. The jukebox belted out Any Heart, not tough or strong enough to take a lot of pain. Jody was playing it deliberately to try to get me past the pain that I was dealing with, like those unexplained nights and the lies that went with them. Little did she realize she was making me relive it all again. My mind went back to the night we met. Like all overprotective big brothers, he had to check me out after I had safely brought her home. It was he that gave Jody my phone number and told her that I was coaching a basketball game at the high school that Friday night. Jody came to the game with her parents only to watch our team get beat badly because two of our best players were carrying out their anger to each other over one of the school cheerleaders that the two of them were chasing. Team spirit went out the window during the first half, and we were down so far, we couldn't recover. During the second half, we outplayed them and doubled their scores, but it was still not enough. The two players involved in the dispute had been benched for the second half. Before they went home that night, everyone knew they were out for the season. We went to the divisional championships that season. Jody's father said that I had been given no choice and agreed with my decision. The two players had allowed their dispute between the two of them to destroy the unity of the team. The next day, Jody and I met for lunch, and that began our relationship. She had wanted to thank me for how I handled the situation with her former boyfriend. Jody's personality to me was addicting, for she seemed to find humor in everything. 8 months later, I asked her father for his daughter's hand, and he gladly gave me his blessing. The jukebox boomed. Takes a lot of pain, love is like a cloud, holds a lot of rain, love hurts. No truer words could have been spoken to me because in the solitude of my mind, that's where it sat. Each day at school I saw the smiling faces of young couples in love, and it reminded me of innocence that Jody and I once had. Slowly I had begun to figure it out. Pat Robertson's son and I were about the same age. Pat, a female in her 40s at the time, worked beside my wife on the second floor at the Blue Cross Data Processing Center in our small town. 5 days a week, 52 times a year for 10 years. Routinely, the 4-floor office complex processed medical insurance claims daily. Each one had to be reviewed and gone thoroughly completely to save as much money as possible. It was surprising how much was refused by a simple thing such as improper coding. Blue Cross was able to cut its responsibility for claims by 10% on that alone. Pat Robertson, my wife's supervisor, met me for the first time on the day of Jody's and my wedding. By that time, she had worked with my wife for 3 years. I knew as soon as I met her by the way she looked at me that she did not like me. It would take time for me to find out the reason. I learned from staff socials over the next few years the reason behind her personal feelings. As I watched Jody and her father walk towards me, I thought I was the richest man in the world. She looked like she was the most beautiful girl in the world, with her blonde hair styled to perfection, the white full-length gown hugging her frame, and a smile that lit up the whole room. From the moment of our return from our honeymoon, Pat Robertson began to hunt for a reason and a way to degrade me or my views in my wife Jody's eyes. Over the course of the last few years of our marriage, she had caused a lot of minor problems for us until both of us found out why she was doing that. That's when my wife began to learn to just block her out whenever she mentioned my name. Pat had one big problem according to all I had talked to. She believed that my wife had married the wrong man. The man she should have married was her son. Matt was a computer nerd who ran his own business and was quietly successful. His biggest problem was he was socially inept. His only problem that because of his upbringing he was socially backward and hadn't dated anyone in years. Most who had gone to school with him had said they had never met a more boring person in their lives than him. Pat felt it was her responsibility as a mother to find him the perfect wife. To her, Jody was it. The lead singer of Nazareth sang, "Love hurts, love hurts. Boy does it ever, especially when the pain is caused by others outside of the lover's control." It became more a problem for Pat Robertson when Jody gave birth to our first daughter. That little ray of sunshine should have been her son Matt's and Jody's, not Jody's and mine. Then 2 years later, our second child, also a girl, came into the world, which made Pat's problem worse. Jody and I had 2 kids that should have been Matt's and Jody's instead of Jody's and mine. What I did not know was that was the day that Pat decided she had to destroy our marriage if Jody was going to be able to give her the grandchildren she wanted. Pat was a woman who did not give up or back down. When she wanted something, she achieved it regardless of the consequences. During her short walk in life, she had already proved that her greatest mastery was in destroying marriages. She had done it 3 times. Taking the man she had trapped into marriage down each time, making herself richer because of it, while leaving the man she had dominated broke and beaten. That was why most of those who knew her son believed that he was afraid of women. Yes, to most who knew her background, she was one scary woman. She was aided in her plan by the Human Resources Department that promoted her to the Assistant Administration Manager and allow her to promote who she wanted to her former position as a sectional supervisor. This gave Pat Robertson access to every security code the data center had in its system. That was when her long-term scheming turned into action. Of course, she picked my wife to step into her shoes. As a result, a pattern was established by her. She started to send with Human Resources approval Jody on every training session for management as possible and got her taking courses online to improve her qualifications in the new field. By doing that, Pat thought it would speed up the breakup of our marriage because of the time it would take away from she called family responsibilities. Jody, thrilled with the chance of further advancement and self-improvement, ate the attention up. That only aggravated Pat even more because I was too supportive of my wife and her new opportunity. Pat had expected that in her eyes I would not have supported her. What Pat failed to understand that as a high school teacher I encouraged everyone to follow their dreams in the educational fields. One of the new in-house programs Pat set up over time was the Thursday night meeting with all sectional supervisors. Since the data center for the Blue Cross was primarily filled with women, it left quite of their husbands totally pissed off. With 4 section leaders on each floor, there were 16 females who had their lives routines changed overnight. The song went on saying, "I'm young, I know, but even, so I know a thing or two." That's what the problem was. What I learned before the truth came out was really an eye-opener. Slowly, one by one, the husbands found the name of another one of these husbands who were having their marital lives indirectly affected by the new policy that Pat brought in. We all personally believe that if Pat had of being honest about who and what she was all about, she would have come out and admitted that she was a butch dyke. Between us all, we formed an informal social group. All of us believed that we had to find some way to force the corporation to cut the mid-management staff some slack. It was on a Thursday night when one of the Thursday night wifeless fathers stopped off at my place asking me to watch his kids. He had reached the point where he was tired of the bullshit and wanted to find out what was so important about these Thursday night meetings. He drove over to the Blue Cross data center to discover there were no cars in the parking lot. After banging on the doors for a few, he attracted security. who came on prepared to take him into custody because of his agitated state. Once he explained why he was so upset, that was when the conversation began to get serious. There was no Thursday night management meeting, and never had been. When he accused them of lying, they produced for him in minutes the electronic sign-out times on the time cards for his wife on Thursday nights for the whole time period and gave it to him. He was smart. He had recorded the conversation on his cell phone. By the time the ladies were due to be home from their usual Thursday night staff meeting, every husband had been forwarded via cell phones a copy, so they could discover for themselves that for the last 16 months their wives had been lying about what was going on. Over the course of the evening, through multiple phone calls, we all decided as a group to keep quiet for now. That's when I decided I needed some guidance. The song continued, I learned from you. I really learned a lot. It came to me in the middle of the night that whatever was going on was Pat Robertson's latest attempt to drive a wedge between Jody's and my relationship. There were two things I did not know. Was Jody a willing participant in it? And was she actually involved with Pat's son Matt? With all that was going on, the next Saturday morning, I met Jody's older brother Bob for coffee. He also knew about Jody's Thursday night meetings. Hell, everybody did. It had cost her attendance as some of her side of the family's special events. Bob had just written it off as it being part of the employment situation his little sister was in. I told Bob of all the problems his sister and I had been going through because of Pat Robertson's ongoing attempts to destroy our marriage. I purposely did not tell him the reason why. Bob felt he could not look into it. That was until I let him listen to the conversation that had been recorded. If you have never seen a police detective listen to a conversation that definitely implies that a scam is being pulled that may or may not be legal, you should. It gives one an interesting lesson on how they respond to things. How many husbands are caught up by this? Bob asked. 16 of us, I respond. It's been going on for about 16 months. I found out because I looked after another husband's kids when he wanted to check things out last Thursday night. It's his voice that you hear on the audio clip. Damn it, Arlie, he said. Don't do anything stupid. We have 16 females whose time is unaccounted for, plus their boss for about 6 hours a week every Thursday night. This has structure, routine, secrecy, and organization to it. Whatever is going on has been deliberately kept from all of you. The way it's been done implies that whatever is going on may not be legal, he explained. Just the fact that what is going on is being covered up is forcing the department to look further into it. Contact those you know. Explain to them that they're not to say anything or do anything to upset the apple cart while this is under investigation. Bob, do you think it's that serious? I had to ask. Don't know yet. It's too early to tell, he said. But their conduct is suspicious enough for us to investigate to find out what they all have been doing during that time. Send me the file that contains that conversation, as there are others who will need to hear it. My gut is telling me your friend stumbled into something big. I took my cell phone and talked to the person I had babysat for Thursday night, letting him know what the police detective wanted us to do. I will pass the word, he said, because no one has said anything, because they thought we should all figure it out together before going forth. I asked him to gather a list of all the ladies' names who were part of those who were unaccountable for Thursday nights and email to Detective Robert Parson as soon as possible. I had to talk to Bob again, so we captured a private moment at a family function a few weeks later. He told me it was being investigated on this end by his department in cooperation with the FBI Computer Fraud Division. He made it clear until it was finished, he couldn't reveal anything. If Jody is involved, she will be treated like all the others. At that point, I knew that what we had accidentally stumbled upon was serious. The jukebox boomed, "Love is like a flame, it burns you when it's hot, love hurts, love hurts." Those words brought tears to my eyes because it reminded me of what happened next. It had been 18 weeks since I had talked to my brother-in-law Bob about the situation. I was headed over to my mother-in-law's to pick up my daughters because I was running late because of one of the problem students' parents. Jody's mother was a saint in my eyes. Since the time Jody had returned to work after maternity leave with the birth of our first, Sharon had stepped up and babysat our daughter. There was no way she was going to allow anyone but her to look after her. We paid her $1,000 a month now because she took care of two. It was my own fault. I ran a yellow light. A truck sitting at the intersection jumped the red light and broadside me on the driver's side. I was loaded into the ambulance and taken to the hospital. As they loaded me up, I asked the officer to call Robert and get him to explain to his mom why I would not be picking up my daughters. The last thing on my mind was the fact that this was a Thursday. Robert, when he heard, called first his sister on her cell phone and found that his call went to the answering service. After calling his mom, he headed over to Pat Roberson's with a team of police officers. It had been learned that Pat was operating a skim program on the data system in the office she worked in, and once a week the 16 ladies underneath her had to work Thursday evening, helping her shave a few dollars off what the hospitals would be paid in their billings. The basement of her home had been turned into a small computer center set up with the help of her son, who had been able to bypass all the security that Blue Cross had installed thanks to the code she had provided. The hospitals she was scamming were all on the East Coast. On each individual bill, they submitted they lost $1 or $2. All it took was adding a processing fee against part of the claim, which would end up being paid by the end user. Over the course of 16 months, with the number of bills submitted, it had added up to a very large sum. Blue Cross Audit Department hadn't caught it until the FBI had come into the corporate office. Pat Robertson had added a processing fee against these hospitals and had that amount transferred daily to a separate account. Once a month, the computer would automatically transfer the built-up amount to an offshore account. The problem was in the raid was that my wife was not with them. He asked Pat Robertson where my wife was. Robert learned by questioning others that Jody was with Matt and had been teaching him social skills every Thursday night for over a year. Once Bob had found out, Pat Robertson made it clear that Jody had refused from day one to work overtime. Pat believed that Jody felt something else was going on and had refused to go along. All the employees actually thought they were doing regular work. Pat had used a special performance raise to cover the extra hours the ladies were putting in. So, all thought they were being paid for the additional hours. This new processing fee, they believed, was just a charge the corporation was trying on a trial basis to see if it would be accepted or challenged, until they decided if they were going to take it nationwide. These were being done quietly, as not to draw the general medical field's attention. Jody had refused to take part, but in order to keep her job had been forced to agree to secrecy and to teach Matt how to become a normal adult who would be able to fit into society's social norms. Tonight, they had gone out for dinner as a couple to the private golf club that Matt was a member of. Robert left the team to do the cleanup and drove with another officer over to the private club in Jackson to arrest Matt and inform his little sister that I was in the hospital. They were not in the restaurant or in the lounge. They were located in a private area square dancing to some programmed music. "Robert, what are you doing here?" Jody asked her brother. "I'm here to arrest your lover," he said. "He's joining his mother and 16 of your coworkers in jail for fraud, theft, and a few other charges." "He's not my lover. He's just my boss's son," Jody replied. "I can prove I'm being paid for my time." "Look, Jody, you just said you're being paid for the services you provide," he said. "Most hookers are. Meanwhile, your husband is lying in the hospital not knowing where you are, with the knowledge that for 16 months you have been lying about what you have been doing on your Thursday nights. Then you tell me it was just so you could sell yourself?" Robert turned to the officer and said, "Officer, have you recorded this on your cam?" The officer acknowledged that he did. "Then arrest my sister on the charge of prostitution. We will leave it up to the district attorney to decide if she can be charged," Robert said with authority, knowing that the charges would not stick, because for one, they had not been caught in the act of transferring money from him to her. The officer walked over and read Jody her rights, then placed her under arrest and cuffed her. Jody was in complete shock. They called for a female police officer to transport her to the holding cells. Although she had not lied, she realized that she had not told the whole truth. The fact that she had told Robert the barest of the facts had left him no choice. While they were waiting for the female police officer, Jody heard her brother call her mother and inform her that she had been found and was under arrest for prostitution. "Don't say anything to anyone, Mom, until I talk to you before I go to see Arlie. It's best that I explain everything to him when I see him." Robert left Jody in tears as soon as the additional female officer showed up. He and the officer he had come with took Matt to jail. "Jody has never slept with me," Matt said. "My mother was paying her to teach me what I did not know. Thanks to her, I have started to date." Jody thought that her husband would not understand. "That may be true," Robert replied. "The problem is that no one will believe it. Not with 17 people being arrested. The problem for her is that I found her with you in a private setting that no one would have thought of looking for in, and she admitted on camera that she was being paid for her services." Matt saw the whole situation for what it was. One big mess. Arlie was the only innocent one in this. Jody had agreed to help him only to get his mother off her back. His mother had been slowly wearing on her for years. He knew he had to say something about himself that he had never revealed. "It's going to be hard to convict Jody with anything," Matt said, "for the simple reason that I am gay. It's a secret that I have kept from everybody, including my mom." The first meeting with Jody, I disclosed that fact to her. "All she has been doing me is teaching me to overcome the personal quirks I had to develop as a protective measure against my mother's conduct towards me when I was growing up." Robert relayed a message for the officer transporting Jody to bring Jody back to pick up her car. She was no longer being charged. After hearing Matt's comments, he concluded he was telling the truth. After locking Matt up, he had gone over to his mother's and explained what had transpired over the course of the evening and what he had learned. "The only question we have to wait on now," Jody's mom said, "is how is Arlie going to view it? Will he accept what she says as the truth after months of lies?" "I don't know, Mom," Bob said. "I'm heading over to the hospital to inform Arlie what I've learned. If I was him, I would leave her after what she has done." Bob got to me before Jody did. He explained in detail what he had learned that evening. "The question I have to ask, Bob," I said, "is there any way to prove that what Matt claims is true? Until I can be sure that Matt is gay, how can I be sure what Jody explains to me is the truth?" Nazareth's lead singer continued, "Some fools think of happiness, blissfulness, togetherness. Some fools fool themselves. I guess they're not fooling me. It's a lonely, dark place when you have to stand alone because there is no way to prove what the truth is. That's why I was in limbo, unable to move until the court case was proceeded on. I had been fooled once. I wasn't going to have it happen to me a second time. I looked over at Jody. We both had our eyes filled with tears. She had told me she did not have an affair with Matt. I had told her that because of her ongoing lies, I had to be able to prove she didn't. It would take another month before the trials would start. Until then, we were in limbo. For now, Jody and our daughters were living with her mother. Jody had been given Pat Roberson's former position. The 16 other section supervisors had been let go because of a lack of trust, although they were not being charged. Nazareth's lead sing continued, I know it isn't true, I know it isn't true, love is just a lie made to make you blue, love hurts, love hurts. I finished my drink, got up, and walked over to her and said, in my heart I know it isn't true. I keep praying that the boyfriend Matt claims he has comes forth to prove both of you right because I need a reason to begin to be able to trust again. Nazareth's closed the song out singing, I know it isn't true, I know it isn't true, love is just a lie made to make you blue, love hurts, love hurts, love hurts. I left the bar with the most beautiful girl in the world crying because of the things she had said and did. Matt's boyfriend, a married man who turned out to be one of my students' parent, stopped into my regular classroom after school was out for the weekend asking if we could speak in private. It took him an hour to explain everything to me. He was also known to be a family friend of the Robertsons. Matt told me what his conduct had caused to you and your wife, the man said. I'm sorry that I did not go to see Matt sooner. When I heard that you were needing a way to verify their stories, I knew I had to come and explain it to you. Faced with what would happen if it became public knowledge, I vowed to him that I would not disclose his name to anyone. I literally ran to my car because I had a place to go as fast as possible. I stopped at the jewelry store before heading over to Jody's parents' place. I knocked on the door and her father answered. Looking at me, he said, why didn't just walk right in? You're always welcome here. Jody was in the kitchen helping her mother prepare dinner. She turned to me in complete surprise. I got down on one knee, pulled out the new ring and said, I know we're still married, but I was wondering if you would be willing to renew our vows and start over? I looked up at the most beautiful girl in the world and she was crying tears of joy. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Bedridden with a high fever, I couldn't even lift a finger. Desperate for just a sip of water, I turned to my eldest son for help. However, to my dismay, he returned not with water, but with a glass brimming with beer. As the beer splashed over me while I lay in bed with a raging fever, I heard laughter echoing from the doorway. It was my son's wife, clapping and giggling alongside my eldest son, who held the empty cup. Despite my feverish haze, the scene etched itself vividly into my mind. Clean the house by the time we get back, huh? I could hardly believe their audacity. I had endured Luke and his wife's selfishness until now, but this was too much to bear. Yes, I will clean it, I managed to say through the pain in my throat, ensuring my son and his wife heard me loud and clear. My name is Mabel, a 73-year-old housewife. My husband, Dylan, aged 75, spends his retirement teaching calligraphy to children at a nearby community center. While he pursued his dream, I supported him with a smile every day. We have 2 sons, the younger one is married with 2 young children. However, our eldest son, aged 44, remains unmarried and living with us. Despite working part-time at a convenience store, he contributes nothing to the household. My husband and I had warned him countless times, but our words fell on deaf ears. Then, out of nowhere, he announced he got married and brought his wife home without so much as a greeting. From that day on, I found myself not only cooking for my son but also for his wife, who showed no gratitude and made unreasonable demands. Even when my husband intervened, their behavior persisted, with my son defending his wife's selfishness. Despite my growing frustration, I hesitated to confront my husband, fearing it would strain our relationship. So, I endured a little longer, hoping for change. Once again, I found myself holding back, complying with my daughter-in-law's request to take her clothes to the cleaners. My husband and I usually make 2 trips a year to visit our second son's family in Canada, particularly during the week-long federal holiday. Our frequent visits have fostered a deep bond with our grandchildren, who eagerly await our arrival. Already, we've purchased their favorite toys as gifts, planning to pick up a roll cake as a souvenir along the way. Excitement bubbled within me the day before our visit as I went shopping after seeing my husband off to his calligraphy class. Along the way, I stopped by a cake shop, opting for handmade cookies that would endure longer than a cake. Imagining the joy on our grandchildren's faces, I hastened home, but the drizzle soon turned into a heavy rain. Arriving home drenched, I debated waiting out the downpour at a convenience store. However, desiring the comfort of a warm bath to ease my chilled body, I purchased an umbrella and hurried home. Yet, as I prepared for a bath, my eldest son's wife barged in, claiming the need to use the bathroom urgently. Despite it not being her house, she demanded I start dinner early and shut the door behind her. Sneezing as I prepared dinner, I feared falling ill just before our departure the next day. Unbeknownst to me, my son's wife lingered in the bath for over an hour. Waking the next morning, the day of our planned visit to our second son's family, I felt sluggish and unwell. My temperature confirmed my fears, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a clear sign of catching a cold in yesterday's rain. Reluctantly, I insisted Dylan go alone this time, fearing I might pass on the cold to our grandchildren. Despite his concern, I urged him to proceed, assuring him it was only a slight fever and a minor cold. I anticipated feeling better after taking some medicine and resting at home. Dylan, who typically doesn't engage much with our eldest son and his wife, informed them of my condition before leaving, asking them to take care of the household chores in his absence. As I bid farewell to Dylan with a smile and prepared to return to bed, I overheard my eldest son and his wife conversing. Their remarks shocked me. "What a bother, it's just a cold." "But now that Dad's gone, we can relax for a bit," they remarked. I couldn't fathom their attitude, considering they lived in our home without contributing financially, but sadly, it wasn't unexpected. When I pointed out that they only had their comforts because of Dylan, Luke and his wife seemed offended, insisting that they were doing us a favor by staying with us in our old age. It was absurd, especially considering they had moved in without invitation and acted as if they were doing us a favor. Despite feeling unwell and wanting to rest early, I tried to ignore their remarks and retreated to my room. However, my daughter-in-law barged in, urging me not to neglect cooking just because I was feeling sick. It was inappropriate for a 35-year-old to rely on her mother-in-law for cooking. Despite my sickness, I insisted they fend for themselves for dinner, a responsibility my husband should have reminded them of before leaving. Despite my efforts to rest, my daughter-in-law persisted, forcing me to get up and prepare a light meal. Luke returned home but didn't acknowledge my presence in the kitchen. Instead, he demanded to know why the bath wasn't ready yet. Their disregard for my illness was apparent, but I pushed through, finishing the meal and then preparing the bath. Returning to the living room, I found Luke and his wife excitedly discussing an upcoming trip abroad, completely oblivious to my discomfort. They revealed plans for a 3-week trip to Europe, a surprise to me as I hadn't heard anything about it beforehand. I felt relieved knowing they would be away, starting from the day after tomorrow. On the morning Luke and his wife were set to depart for their trip, my condition had deteriorated to the point where I couldn't even leave my bed. When I checked my temperature, it was nearly 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Thirsty but unable to lift my head due to a pounding headache, I was in a sorry state when Luke approached me. "Hey, cook us some food." "You can still cook even if you have a cold," he said, oblivious to my condition. Tears welled up in my eyes at the sight of my son telling his sick mother to cook. "Order food," I managed to say weakly. Luke frowned but left without a word. Before he exited the room, I asked him to bring me a glass of water, hoping he would at least do that much for me. However, when Luke returned, he brought a glass full of beer and splashed it all over me as I lay bedridden with a high fever. From the doorway, the loud laughter of my eldest son's wife echoed, accompanied by her clapping hands in amusement. Beside her, my son Luke was also laughing, holding an empty cup. It was an unbelievable sight, etched into my memory despite my feverish state. "Make sure you clean the house before we get back," my son's wife mocked, before they cheerfully left the house. I mustered the strength to respond, vowing to keep it clean despite the pain in my throat. Exhausted, I fell asleep without even wiping the beer-soaked mess from my face. When I woke up, I felt somewhat refreshed, albeit groggy. Surprisingly, I didn't feel sticky at all, and the covers on my bed had been changed. Puzzled, I was met by my husband Dylan, who entered the room with a basin. Concerned, he asked, "Are you okay?" I was taken aback. Wasn't he supposed to be with our second son's family? I tried to voice my confusion, but couldn't. Sensing my bewilderment, Dylan explained that he had returned early upon realizing my deteriorating condition. Untrusting of Luke and his wife to care for me, he had cut short his visit and flown back home, urged by our second son's family. When Dylan returned, he discovered me lying exhausted in bed, with a lingering smell of beer in the air. Quickly, he cleaned my face with a damp towel, tidied up the area, and cared for me while I slept for a full day. When he asked me what had happened, I tried to explain, but my voice failed me. The memory of being splashed with beer by Luke brought tears to my eyes. Seeing this, Dylan brought me some water and apologized, saying, "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked you. Just rest for now." He then went to prepare some porridge, having thoughtfully prepared it in advance so it would be ready whenever I woke up. Dylan's kindness brought tears to my eyes again, and thanks to his care, I regained my energy in about 2 days. When I told Dylan about Luke and his wife's actions while he was away, his expression turned stern. "I can't stand it anymore," he muttered. I, too, felt unable to pacify him as I had done before because I couldn't forgive them myself. In fact, Dylan and I had secretly been planning to build a new house without informing our eldest son and his wife. Although the new house wasn't finished yet, we had already moved into a monthly rental apartment and sold our house, shocking them with the news. We had been approached by someone interested in buying our land to build a shop, which facilitated the quick sale. Initially, we had intended to keep the old house for our eldest son and his wife, but after the way they treated us, there was no need to consider them anymore. The property had already been turned into an empty lot, leaving them undoubtedly shocked to find the house gone. The new house would be completed in about 2 weeks, thanks to a kind contractor who allowed us to store our historic belongings and furniture there in advance after we explained the situation. When we informed our eldest son and his wife about our plans, our son shouted, "Are you kidding me? I'll report you to the police." At that moment, with his wife yelling in the background, my husband, Dylan, took over the phone, and I switched it to speaker mode. In a low voice, he addressed our son, saying, "Go ahead, tell the police. I'll tell them too. You guys threw beer at your sick mother and then went on a vacation abroad, even forcing her to do housework while she was sick. Who do you guys think is the bigger sinner? You guys are, not us, for disposing of your things." My husband's expression as he spoke to our eldest son resembled that of a villain. Ignoring Dylan's words, our son continued to protest, "This has nothing to do with that. In selling the house, where are we supposed to live? Where are you guys even staying?" Dylan firmly responded, "That house was originally ours. It's our right to sell it. Plus, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us anymore," before hanging up. 2 weeks later, we received a call informing us that our new house was completed. Excitedly, Dylan and I headed over. The call was from the carpenter, a friend of Dylan's, who served as the site supervisor. He showed us around the house, explaining the layout. Designed as a single-story accessible house with our future retirement in mind, it exceeded our expectations in beauty. Grateful, we thanked the carpenters, who left, saying, "Georgia really helped us out back in the day, so this is nothing." So, Dylan and I began living in our new house. It was even more comfortable than we had imagined, and our life was peaceful without our eldest son and his wife around. However, about a month after moving in, our eldest son and his wife unexpectedly showed up. Neither Dylan nor I had disclosed our address to them, and our younger son, Luke, and his wife shouldn't have either. They probably hired a detective to find us. Asserting his rights, our son declared, "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, dispose of our stuff, and then move to such a nice place by yourselves. As your eldest son, I have the right to live here, don't I?" With large bags in their hands, they seemed determined to move in. Just then, Dylan and I were taken aback as our neighbors approached from the back of the house. "What are you guys here for? To what end? After taking our living place, how dare you ask such a thing?" Dylan exclaimed. But our son remained defiant, stating, "From today, we're living here too." As they prepared to step in, the front door opened. "Hey, Luke, what are you doing here?" Are you here to cause trouble again? Come on, you're old enough to take care of yourself, Leon said with a surprised look on his face. Beside him were his wife and their 2 grandchildren. They had come to visit because the new house had just been finished. After chilling at home for a bit, Leon's family went to a nearby store. Who are they? Are they mean people? The 5th grader Layla asked innocently. Suddenly, Leon, who was about to ask Luke and his wife to leave, got an idea. While Jasper's family is staying for a week, you 2 should also stay here. But I won't let you stay forever, he said, welcoming everyone into the house. As they gathered in the living room, Luke and his wife sat on the sofa. Phew, I'm tired. Can I have some coffee, mother-in-law? I like it black, Luke requested casually. Leon's wife was surprised by Luke and his wife's easygoing request. Then the grandchildren approached Luke and his wife. Why can't you do things yourselves? Even I, a kid, can pour my own juice, one of them said. The innocent remarks of the grandchildren made Luke's wife uncomfortable, so she went to pour her own coffee. But the grandchildren's questions continued. Why can't you cook or clean up after yourself? My mom and dad always do, they said. The grandchildren, who were raised well by Leon's wife, were responsible and often helped her. Leon also worked alongside his wife, so it was confusing for the grandchildren to see Luke and his wife doing nothing. Initially, Luke and his wife argued back, but the questions kept coming. By the end of the week, they were exhausted. Luke's wife especially didn't like being called Auntie. Don't call me Auntie, she said earnestly. But when the grandchildren asked why not, saying she wasn't young enough to be called sister, she was shocked. Even Leon and I, who were listening nearby, couldn't help but laugh. After Jasper and his wife left, we asked Luke and his wife to leave too. They were tired from the children's constant questions, so they left without much fuss. However, a few months later, we received a message asking, "Can you lend us some money?" Until then, they had been staying in our home, eating our food without paying. Since Luke, our oldest son, was making enough money from his job at the convenience store to cover all expenses, it wasn't a problem. After being evicted from our home, Luke and his wife were expected to take responsibility for their own expenses. However, they continued spending money as if nothing had changed, relying on borrowed funds without any savings. Luke's sole income came from his part-time job at a convenience store, while his wife showed no interest in finding work. Given their circumstances, it was bold of them to ask for financial assistance. We will never lend you money again, nor will we offer any help, we firmly told them before blocking Luke's number. A few days later, while my husband and I were away, we received a call from our home security company. Luke and his wife had attempted to break into our house through a window. It was pitiful to see them resort to such measures out of desperation. Though they were swiftly apprehended by security and later released by the police, they received a harsh reprimand. Since then, they have ceased their attempts to intrude into our home. We've blocked their calls, ensuring we have no further contact with them. According to our second son, Leon, Luke even asked him for money. It appears Luke had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now on the run due to his inability to repay it. You brought this upon yourself, deal with your own debts, Leon firmly responded before blocking Luke's number as well. As for us, we've chosen to move on from those who would pour beer over a sick person. My husband now teaches calligraphy classes from our home, providing a peaceful environment for learning and creativity. When Jasper and his family visit, the grandchildren and other children enjoy calligraphy classes together, forging friendships and creating memories. We are grateful for these tranquil days and cherish each moment.